predict if you can make it or not, the sign-ups and so on. Many fighting fires can pop up in the last minutes now. So we start on time, but let them join as they like. So today is a very special presentation by a gentleman who I met when he interviewed me on Money FM twice. Once I was talking about the EGN peer groups, and another time about my keynote on executive loneliness. And as he interviewed me, I also I said that we should interview you also here with EGN. But I think I'm not in a position to interview such a professional who's been in the industry, a journalist by profession, and highly skilled in communication. So today we have with us Glenn, who will take us through how to communicate with an impact. So Glenn, without further ado, I hand over to you.
Nick and Donna, thank you so much. Now that everybody's comfortably seated, I want to take you all on a trip, because none of us can really get out and do that. So let's take a quick trip together. Those of you that may have been to this spot, I won't ask you to shout it out, but as you may know, it's Shibuya Crossing, Hachiko Crossing in Shibuya in Tokyo. And every change of the lights, up to 2,500 people can cross this intersection. Of course, we aren't seeing those numbers right now at the current moment, but during better times, certainly we did, and ahead in the future, hopefully we will again. It's a very dynamic and vibrant part of Tokyo. If you've been there, you know that. And here's the view from street level. And as you look at street level, a couple of things come to mind. And I'd like you to just take a quick look at this scene and register, if you will, for a moment, what grabs your eye, what grabs your attention first. And I'd like you to go ahead, take this opportunity down in the center of your bar to type into the chat the first image that came to your mind. So go ahead and type that in right now. If it was a sign, if it was whatever it was, type that in. And Donna, I'm going to have you call out some of the things that have been put into the chat. Go ahead.
Wow, it's going so fast. H&M sign, monster, M, Chinese word, lively. DHAs, the mass of people, look like a live manga. Vibrant lights and people, monster, it's alive, the face, busy. Lights and people. Thank you guys, forever.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's great. And as you can tell, there's no shortage of things to see in this intersection. And when I ask people to do what I've just asked you to do, these are typically some of the bigger groups of responses that I get, right? The 109, H&M, DMM, Monster, the stoplight, the people, all very relevant in terms of what we are seeing in this scene. Now, why do I show this to you? Especially in a time, well, frankly, unfortunately, there aren't too many people in that intersection. But if you look at the signs alone, this, in my mind, very much represents our communication landscape today. It is so crowded, not only with messages coming at us on so many different mediums, so many different channels, but also the messages that you as executives and your corporate teams are trying to push out to the world in terms of what you do, how you do it, to your different stakeholders, in your sales capacity, in whatever capacity you are. Our communication landscape looks very much like Shibuya Crossing. And it's easy for messages to get lost. So today, as we spend a little bit of time together, what I'd like to do is maybe give you some ideas about how your message can perhaps not get lost, but maybe stand out like one of those several messages that you saw earlier. Some of you may be familiar with this study that started by Microsoft in 2000. At that moment in time in 2000, 12 seconds was the average attention span that people had. And then it went down to 8 in 2013. And presently, you know, the best guessed estimate for Gen Z is about 2.8 seconds worth of attention span. Well, and our friend the goldfish here has 9 seconds of attention. So you can see, now, of course, the numbers might not be exact, and the presentation of this may be slightly different. Surely we know people that have attention span that's longer than 2.8 seconds. But I think the point is made. We very quickly move on to other things if the thing we're looking at doesn't keep our attention. And as I hope I'll keep your attention today, because I don't want you to move on to other things as well. So let me take you back a little bit. What brings me to this point today? I've been a journalist for 25 years. I worked for CNN International, CNBC Asia, ABC News, USA Today, many other organizations, print, television, radio. Of course, I currently have a radio show on Money FM on the weekends, weekend mornings. This was me about 15 years ago, one of my last days at CNN International. I had a lot more hair and a lot less chin, but that's the march of time. We can't do much about that. And then in the past 12 years, I've been doing this. I've been coaching senior executives to be confident, to be concise in their messaging and their ability to present messages, not just for TV or radio or print interviews, but also at conferences, at any kind of stakeholder engagements like town hall meetings and things like that. And so that has been my current capacity as I come to you today. And I want to give a quick note of thanks to Nick and Donna and EGN for having me on today. And I do hope that we have some good time here and some ability for you to ask some questions. And I would just say that as Donna will be helping me with some of the Q&A, if you do have questions that do pop out throughout the session, I won't take them as they come in, but I will stop along the way and we'll take some of the questions that come in. So please be thinking of them. And of course, we'll have time for Q&A at the end as well. But don't be shy. If something comes to mind, pop it into the chat and I'll try to do my best to answer that for you. We'll have a few polls along the way because I'd like to gauge your interest and understanding of this topic of highly effective communication. So please get ready when the polls come up to make your selections as well. Well, the most effective communicators in the world, and I've worked with a lot of them as a journalist, as now a radio host, and as an executive coach, they share some common elements, right? They are confident, they are credible, and they are concise and meaningful in what they say. These three words are absolutely essential for somebody to be the most effective communicator possible. This is our foundation for today. We'll go a lot deeper, but here's where we start. Communicators like Jack Ma, or perhaps Michelle Obama, or if we go over to Germany, or Imran Khan in Pakistan, Tony Fernandez in Malaysia. These are all very, very key communicators who get their messages out and who are very much respected and very concise in the way that they give out their information. So let's do this first. I'd like you to take our first poll, and Donna will bring that up for you. I would like you to rank in importance these three elements in terms of your own communication. What you think is the most important. Is it to be confident and credible and clear? What is number one, number two, and number three? And let's go ahead and rank those. I love watching the bars go across. If you're just joining us, great to have you with us today. I'm Glenn Van Zutphen, and we are just in our first poll here talking about the elements of great communication from my perspective: confidence, credibility, being clear, clarity, and I'd like you to rank those in the way that you see them of importance. All right, well, we have a close, yes.
You can't rank it, I think. We can only choose one.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. My mistake. I thought we were going to be able to rank them. So let's choose the most important one to you then. Pardon me. We'll do a little on the fly changing here. All right. So it looks like between confidence and clarity, we have basically a dead heat right there. And I think those are two very good ones to look at, because without one, without confidence to present, then frankly, a lot of the other things don't matter, but you do have to be clear in the way that you present as well. I'm going to get out of this and move on to our next slide. So effective communicators, of course, the late, great Steve Jobs on the left of your screen, Richard Branson on the right. Now, Richard Branson's been a little more controversial in the past few weeks based on what his ask has been of the British government to bail out Virgin. But if we think back maybe a little bit further on, he has always had a very good reputation as a communicator. And some of the key, I think, elements of these great communicators, the ones we just mentioned earlier, of course, before doing our poll: authenticity, empathy in hard situations, being knowledgeable, memorable in the way that they communicate. They expect the unexpected when they're out in front of a crowd and in front of an audience or in front of stakeholders. They consider their audience always, right? What does the audience need to hear and want to hear? And so these are very important elements of being an effective communicator. Well, when you think of your memorable communicators, I'd like you to go ahead and type in the chat right now, leaders or spokespeople that you feel are, in your own mind, are very good. Now, it could be some of the ones that I mentioned earlier, or it could be some other ones. And Don, if you just go ahead and let me know what you see popping up in the chat, that'd be great.
Obama, Paul Iger, Anthony Robbins, Steve Jobs,
okay, wow.
Obama.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Barack Obama, Simon. And then, yep.
MLK.
Iron Brown.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep. Yeah.
Very good.
Nick Johnson. That one is cool.
Girl, yeah.
Okay.
Rockin'. Gary V.
Yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you.
The New Zealand Prime Minister, yes, Arhan as well. She is great, isn't she? Yeah. She's done a wonderful job with her COVID-19 response. Great. Thank you so much. Well, I have to bring up these two guys, right? In every communication scenario, you either love one and hate the other, or hate one and love the other, depending on your politics and your worldview. But from my perspective, they are both extremely good communicators with the audiences that matter to them. And that is the key message, I think, between these two, the key important factor. They absolutely speak to their base, and they absolutely speak to their base in a way, in a method, and through channels that is relevant and that is sticky, if I can put it that way, to their bases. So, who do you think is the more effective communicator when you look at their ability to get messages out that are memorable, that impact audiences? Who do you think? Donald, maybe you'll pull up the poll for us. Well, Trump was leading, and now it's dead even, huh? Okay. 52, 48. Wow, that's nearly what the election split was in 2016 with Hillary and Trump. What do you know? Okay, 53 to 47 Obama, but very close, right? Very, very close. I'm just going to end the poll now. And thank you for that, everybody. It is, I think, very interesting to see these two gentlemen and our finalists, 53 Obama, 47 Trump, and to see that they are both very effective in their own ways, and their own ways, let's all be honest, right, are very different from one another. Well, what is imperative for your communication as we talk about you being senior leaders, senior executives, and I know that many of you have decades, years, if not decades of experience in communicating, in giving presentations, in talking to stakeholders, internal and external. And so today, as I present some of my ideas, I hope that maybe some will give you some food for thought, if you will. If there are things that I say that that you think might work for you, great, please take those. If there are things that you know you've tried before, don't work for your own personal style, that's fine too. There is no one definitive way to communicate, as we know, because we are all so different as human beings and as communicators. So, imperative for your communication, right? Your audience must hear and remember your messages. Sounds pretty basic, doesn't it? But it's not always that easy. And secondly, you must make sure that you don't do or say anything that distracts or takes away from those messages being heard and remembered. So these are two very important elements of communication, and we will break those down for you today. First, though, as we think about communicating to any stakeholder group, to any audience, we have to have a clear and firm communication goal in our minds, right? Typically, for most of you, I would imagine it's either number one or number two, or some combination thereof. Inform, persuade, and of course, entertainment is there too for some audiences as well. But typically speaking, we would think about informing or persuading. Now, if you have that clearly in your mind, it is much easier to then carry on with the rest of putting your messaging and your communications into action or impactful communication. Of course, there are many opportunities for you today to reach out to those audiences and to hopefully get them to remember your messages. These are just some of the many ways, both external, obviously media is external, internal, town hall meetings, conferences. Of course, many of you are working toward developing your own thought leadership, or have already developed your own thought leadership through posting on social media, perhaps articles on LinkedIn, or participating in conferences as keynote speakers or on panelists as panel discussions go. So these are just some of the many ways. Now, of course, some of these are a bit on hold right now, but they will be coming back at some point. And welcome to those of you that have just joined us for this seminar. I'd like to do a quick case study with you. And I call this one the reluctant Olympic marketing boss, as an example of one form, one style of communication. Now, if we go back to the year 2005, those of you who were here in Singapore, as I was in those days, you might remember that the Olympic Organizing Committee met at the Swiss Hotel Stamford for about 3 days to decide who would get the Olympics, who would win the Olympic bid, rather, for 2012, the 2012 Games. And so that group got together, all of the bidding countries came, everybody was in town, everybody gave their in-person presentations, and then of course there was lots of schmoozing and dinners and drinks and all that. And finally, on a Wednesday night, they decided on London for the 2012 Games. I was working at CNBC at the time. I was the regional news editor in charge of overseeing coverage for 5 bureaus across Asia, across the region. And the very next day, so that was Wednesday, Thursday, this happened, the London bombings. And if any of you in the audience had anyone personally affected by those, of course, we want to give proper condolences and credit and notice to that, and present this in the right tone, I should say. But as we look a little bit further beyond that very tragic day in which over 50 people lost their lives, we at CNBC had invited the head of marketing for the London Games to come on and talk to CNBC Live on that Thursday night about how London won the Games. Now, we had invited this person to come on before the bombings had occurred. So the bombings happened later in the afternoon on Thursday. This gentleman came on in the evening, around 7:30 or so, to talk about the London Games. Let's play the interview. You can adjust the volume on your own laptop or your own desktop as we play this particular clip, which I'm about to play. As you are watching this, watch for several things. One, from a communication standpoint, were the questions fair? Was the guest well prepared? Did he build rapport with the two journalists who are asking him questions? Were the responses memorable? And let's talk about whether or not he maximized that interview, that communication moment. And here we go. Have a watch.
Games. We now are joined by Andrew Craig, who is with the Olympic Bidding Committee. First of all, your reaction to what's happening?
Well, obviously it's a terrible day, but I really can't comment on any of these events. We know nothing more here than you do, so I'm really not prepared to comment at all.
Okay. Well, then let's talk about the fact that London did win the Olympic bid for 2012. Obviously, this story raises the question of security issues. That was already high on the agenda anyway, but how much more important has this become, and what does this tell us about what London needs to do to prepare for?
It's a critical issue, but again, I have not come here to talk about those issues. I come here to talk about.
Okay, but you have to agree the security issues are of utmost important in the preparation for the games,
as
correct?
they are for any sports event, yes.
Okay, let's talk about then what London is planning on doing to prepare for the games when it comes to security.
I'm really not here to talk about that. I came here to talk about how London won the games.
Okay, Daniel?
Andrew, I appreciate that you don't want to comment on terrorism, but part of the entire bid was the security question. Semco brought it up in the presentation. Part of the reason that's given for Madrid being one of the less favorite countries was because of the Madrid bomb blasts. The issue of security planning, as I say, was part of your entire bid. So could you tell us within the bid structure how you addressed that issue?
Security obviously is a major part of our bid, as it is for every every bidding city. But again, that's not why you invited me here. You invited me here to talk about how London went about winning the games.
Well, okay then, if you want to direct the interview, Andrew, you go ahead and tell us why London won the games.
Well, we're very pleased to have won the games, of course. What we have done over the last 2 years is put together a program that was very much based around what's important to the IOC, as opposed to what was important to us. We had a clearly structured program based upon identifying the needs of each individual IOC member and really targeting and meeting their individual needs for the Olympic Games in London.
All right, Andrew, thank you very much indeed for coming by.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, that's our friend Andrew Craig, who gave us that. A very interesting interview, and some would say cringeworthy. About 10% of the time, people like that interview. They think he did a good job. About 90% of the time, most people think that he did not. So what do we think about that? Well, when we look at this particular interview,
The games,
let's talk about first the questions that I asked you earlier, and then I'll give you some key takeaways from my perspective. And Donna, I think we got yes, no poll. There we go. So just go ahead and answer each one of these questions, yes or no, and we'll go through and have a look. As you're filling that out, I love some of these responses. Who made this guy a spokesperson? Does he still have a job? It's funny, the last I heard, he was posted to Iraq after some of the bombings there. So he had left the Olympic Organizing Committee, I don't believe because of this interview per se. Yeah, so he was somewhere else. He made a fool of himself. Questions were fair and expected. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we look at our poll. Yes, fair questions, well prepared, pretty obvious. Report, 0, right? Maximize the interview, no. As expected, right? Again, like I say, about 10% of the time, people say, you know what, actually he did a good job because he didn't talk about something that he didn't want to talk about, which was terrorism. And I appreciate that viewpoint, but I will also add that in the world in which we live, everything can change in a heartbeat. Look what you know now that you didn't know 4 months ago or 5 months ago, just about one little virus, right? That has turned out to be not so little. So the world can change very quickly and our lives along with it. And as a spokesperson, as a communicator, you need to be resilient enough and forward thinking enough to be able to deal with situations that come up that frankly were not either of your making or something that you have no control over the outcome of it. And I think COVID-19 is a perfect example of where we're at with that right now. So in my opinion, I think that he missed some opportunities. There are the results. And you can go ahead and have a quick look at them. Now, as you're having a quick look at those results, and I'll take them down in just a moment, first, and I think most important lesson from our Olympic spokesman, Andrew Craig, is empathy. He did not show very much empathy at all, quite honestly. And anytime people are impacted by anything, and certainly we have seen this in the last few months, empathy has to be first and hopefully heartfelt in your response to anything. And you know, it might even be as something as seemingly simple as having empathy for your staff who are working at home, who are trying to juggle kids that are home and a spouse that's got the living room table for their office, and you know, whatever is going on in their personal life, even if they aren't directly impacted by the pandemic. So second thing, sorry, the first thing was expect the unexpected. That's clear. Second is empathy. Third, referring to other material or other statements. If you, for example, in your case, if your company has put together a formal response to how you're dealing with COVID-19, and somebody asks you about that in a public forum or one of your stakeholders, a client or something, well, you should feel free to rely back and refer back to that statement. Just like Andrew Craig didn't have to think of any very smart answers about terrorism in the Olympics. All he literally had to do was take the Olympic bid and open it to the page, whatever that page number was, and read what it said about terrorism. Even that would have been more interesting and more useful than what he did, which was basically stonewall. The last point, give a little then bridge. We don't all have the answer to every question, nor should we necessarily answer every question that comes at us. Some of them are quite difficult. Some of them we just don't know the answer to. But what we should try to do when people, whether it's a staff member or a journalist or a client, we should always try to give as much of an answer as we can. But then if we need to stop, say why we're going to stop, and then move on to something else that we can talk about. That's called bridging to another topic, another answer. So these, I feel, are three very important lessons that we learned from our friend Andrew Craig. He was right about one thing. He was not invited on the show to talk about terrorism. He mentioned that a couple of times. Absolutely true. But he could have done so much more to make so much more out of that, rather than effectively saying no comment and shutting down, building a wall between himself and the two journalists, rather than trying to bring them in and help them understand what's going on. And perhaps if he would have just had a simple statement like, you know, we don't know what's going on, we don't know who's responsible, but once we figure this out in weeks to come, we will all gather the appropriate authorities, the police, the military, the Olympic security folks, and we will figure out how to make sure that the Olympics in 2012 are the safest games ever, etc. He didn't have the forethought, the presence of mind to even do that, and I think it was to his detriment. Although I have to say, I should probably send him a holiday card every year, because I get so much use out of this video as a training tool that actually I should probably be quite thankful that he acted the way that he did. Okay, let's move on. Sorry, let me just go ahead and check and see on the chat if there are any questions that you might have right now. How do you say what you have to say is important? That was a disaster in that case. Yep, he lacked grace. I agree. And could have stayed on his position and respond and react with grace and style. I totally understand. And you know what? Let me just expand on that point just a little bit. Because the event, the bombings were literally still taking place at 7 p.m. We weren't sure if they were over yet. There were 4 or 5 of them already. So the journalists were not looking for any kind of definitive answer or statement about the terrorism in London or what was happening, right? So because there was so much uncertainty, all he had to do was kind of help them along a little bit, and they weren't expecting any solid, you know, conclusive answers from him. But and he could have done it with, I think, a great deal of grace and style, and come out looking actually quite good from that interview, despite the tragedy that was unfolding around him. All right, let's move on. It's a global issue. By his answer, it didn't seem that he saw it that way. Yep, absolutely. Okay, let's move forward. And as you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. and I'll try to get around to them as we're going through our content. Let's talk about two key elements that I believe are important for every high-performing communicator and spokesperson to think about. And that, first of all, obviously, your verbal content, right? Secondly, the nonverbal delivery. So let's break those down. And we could spend a lot of time breaking these down, but in the interest of time, I'll give you a fairly high level of view of this. First off, when we think of verbal content, right? Audience-centric information. I cannot stress this enough. If you are communicating with anybody, with any of your stakeholders, with media or coworkers, and you are not thinking about their needs first, you are not doing the best job you can possibly do to prepare for that communication. I'll talk more about that later. Secondly, in terms of your verbal content, you need to be understood. Duh, right? Of course, we all know that. We need to think about the pace, how fast you're talking. In an environment like Singapore and across Southeast Asia and ASEAN, many people, if you are conducting business in English, have English as a second or third language. If you are at a conference and you are talking to a group of hundreds of people, that group may only have a percentage that are native English speakers. So we have to think about our pace. How fast or how slow, more appropriately, do we need to go to make sure that people understand? And many times it's not just about the pace, but it's about pausing as well and giving people time to let their brains kind of catch up and assimilate the information that you're giving them. The type of language you use will be very dependent on the audience you're in front of. You would explain your business and the intricate dealings of your business to your family in one way, and you would explain it to a colleague in the industry in a very different way. I think that goes without saying. So we need to think about what language is appropriate for the people, the audiences that we are speaking to. And then finally, of course, jargon, right? Every industry has its jargon. Every industry has its acronyms. We love a good acronym here in Singapore. And if you need proof of that, just get on any of the expressways and you'll be quickly taking the ECP to the PI, to the KPE, to the PIE, to the TPE, and then up to the BKE, and you'll get up to Woodlands eventually. So we love those acronyms. Every industry has them. Every company has them. Just make sure when you're communicating that the audience you're communicating with, either A, you know for a fact that they understand those, or B, that you explain them in such a way that they won't feel left out or uncertain as to what you're talking about. And finally, culture. I've been in Asia for the better part of 30 years. I've lived in Tokyo, Hong Kong, and here, and work across Asia with my clients, and I've worked across Asia as a journalist as well. And we all know that culture is absolutely important when you think about communicating with people. And whether it's more traditional cultures or whether you're someone from a Western culture trying to communicate with someone from a regional culture. It is very important that we understand what those cues are and that we respect them, because that is the way that you are going to be effective and memorable in your communication. So we have to think about some of those norms and some of those cultural matters. Well, one thing in our verbal delivery, and think back to the last staff meeting you had, you were all sitting around the table, and I guarantee you in every office, there is a person who starts every sentence with one of these words. And hopefully it's not you, but maybe it is. I don't know, we're not gonna ask you. At least we're not gonna ask you to identify yourselves. But ums, ahs, so's, wells, I would say, I think, all of these, what I call verbal pauses, rather than just pausing and answering the question, people stumble into the answer. Well, I think I can best answer that by saying blah, blah, blah. Why not just pause and give the answer? The reason I think verbal pauses are not in your best interest is, first of all, they waste a lot of time, generally speaking. Secondly, they become annoying to the listener. And oftentimes we start focusing, as listeners, we start focusing on the and the ah that we know is coming, or the so that is coming, rather than waiting for the great content and the important points that are going to be given after that. So one of the most important things I think you can do as a communicator, if you do have a verbal pause that you typically start your sentences with, get rid of it. And instead, do a mental countdown, 3 seconds, and then start your answer, whatever that answer might be to a given question. It is very hard to do, and oftentimes we don't realize that we have one of these verbal pauses in our repertoire until we do some on-camera training, or we have somebody coaching us that is willing to point that out to us. Hopefully you don't have that challenge, but I'd like to see any of you that think that you do. And I'm not talking about those linking words when we're linking phrases, linking ideas, those conjunctions, and, but, or, for, nor. Those are fine when you're linking ideas. I'm talking about strictly starting every sentence with a particular word or a particular phrase. So, Donna, maybe you pull up this poll for us. I would love to know. It's a yes or no. You're not identified, so you don't have to worry about calling yourself out. But just let us know, do you think you have this issue? It's pretty much even right now. We're looking at 50 to 47%. This is one of the most simple communication foibles that people can fix that instantly changes the clarity of their answers. Okay, we're going to go ahead and end the polling. Share the results right here. So you're pretty much even, those of you who think, maybe I do have that issue, and those of you that think, no, I definitely don't. It's worth figuring it out, because that thing alone is one thing that if you were to change it for the better, which is get rid of it, start with good, clear, concise answers, that alone would go a long way in helping you become a more solid communicator. All right, just had something pop up on the, okay, I'll stop sharing the results. There we go. In the chat, no, hope not. Be honest. Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yes, be honest, guys. I expected very different results. I did too. I expected actually more. I think yes, yeah, and many of us do. If I can just pause, if I can just venture a guess, some of you that said you don't have that issue, you might in fact have it if you were to record yourself over time or during the course of a meeting. You might see that actually you do have that, but we'll see. All right, I hope you don't. And if you do, I hope you can get rid of it now that you're aware of it. But let me tell you, regardless of your own situation, next time you get in a meeting, it could be a virtual meeting if you guys are using virtual meetings these days, as many are. Listen as different people present. How do they start their sentences? Are they using a verbal pause to get into it? I am guessing that a fair number probably do. All right, let's shift now. We have the verbal content, of course, is very important, what those messages are, the way that you present them, and now the non-verbal delivery, because for effective communication to happen, we have to marry the verbal and the non-verbal in a very effective way. Some communicators do this at an extremely high level. Let's think back to Steve Jobs, right? The way he would walk across those stages. You think back before Steve Jobs, you know, he was the guy that really brought this idea into the forefront of using an entire stage, of using big, bold graphics behind him, not having notes, not standing at a lectern and reading from, you know, from prepared notes. He was really the guy that brought that into popular being. And ever since then, you know, it almost seems a little bit weird now when we see somebody standing at the podium delivering a keynote speech or something. We almost instinctively expect them to be walking and using the stage in an appropriate way. Now, of course, that presents its own challenges, which we're not going to discuss today, which is how do you use the stage? How do you not look like just a caged animal walking back and forth, but you walk with purpose and you gesture with purpose. And that, of course, is a whole separate topic. But I think it's suffice it to say, when we think about our nonverbal delivery, these are some of the topics that come ahead, right? Eye contact, body and hand movement. How much hand should I use? How much gesturing should I do? Is a common question that I get. And typically, if there is a reason to use your hands, maybe you're counting 1, 2, 3 elements of your latest offering or your latest product, or maybe you want to start at this side and then complete your thought on this side, something like that. You know, those might be appropriate ways. Let me just mention one thing on that too. You know, we think of a timeline, right? The timeline starts at the early or 0 on the what will be my right, your left, and it goes all the way to the end on which is my right, or sorry, your right, my left. And so when you gesture to an audience, if you're starting at the beginning, and I'll get over here a little bit, if you're starting at the beginning of your company's journey and you're going all the way through to the end, you need to start on this side first, right? Not starting on this side, because we would naturally do it individually. We would think left or right. You have to do it opposite so the audience can see that in the way that they perceive a timeline, which is this side to that side. Okay. Appropriate dress, video backgrounds, right? Now, this has never been more, I think, important or noticeable now than now in the last few months. Some of the crazy way that people have been dressing for their video conferences, and some of the really, well, distracting, let's be gentle and be kind, backgrounds that some of them have are very, very, well, I'll say disturbing, because frankly they are sometimes. All right, so you want to be mindful of that, because we want to make sure, again, that people focus on what you're saying and not the other things around you, not your movement, not how you're dressed, not how the background looks, not the kids coming into the office when you're trying to do something online, etc. And then, of course, all the obvious, mobile phone off, keep your hands free. Many people have a pen in their hand. They're twirling the pen and flipping it around. It's nervous energy, and frankly, many times they don't even realize it's there, but it's distracting. So we do need to be careful about many of these particular items. Well, I want to play this, the sound. There's no sound, so don't bother reaching for your sound on this. I've turned the sound off. So this guy, Pat Brown, is the CEO of Impossible Foods. You know, you've all heard of Impossible Burgers, the plant-based food that's now becoming so popular. You can get them at Burger King and elsewhere. And I want you just to look. This was an interview he did last week for Reuters. Now, Reuters news agency is one of the most important and widely distributed news organizations in the world. And Pat did this interview, and it was quite a long interview. He'll come back up on screen in just a moment. But I want you to look at how he's dressed. Look at the background. He's clearly in his bedroom or something. I'm not quite sure where he is. Here he comes again. The pictures are askew. There's stuff on the bed. It looks like maybe a whiteboard or something. The chair is there. This is the guy that's the CEO of a major company. And I will say he is, it's a video interview. So they did a video story on him. Why did he not take literally 30 seconds before he got online with the journalist to do this interview and tidy up a little bit, or change the angle of the camera so it wasn't focused on all his junk? Never mind how he's dressed. I mean, a hoodie and a t-shirt. I mean, really, like, we're all on lockdown, we're all on circuit breaker, but it doesn't mean you have to look like you're, in jail or something. So, you have to consider your verbal. Yes, of course, the messages are so important and urgently important. You have to consider the nonverbal, what the look is like, and what people are going to see and how they're going to perceive you. All of you are senior executives. If anybody should be looking good, it better, in your organization, it better be you. All right, let's move on. It pains me to even watch that. Okay, so we talk about clear and effective messages. I want to give you two quick examples here of a couple. Again, you can adjust your volume on your side.
Nobody knows this stuff better than me. Nobody knows more about taxes than I do, and income than I do. Nobody knows more about construction than I do. Nobody knows more about campaign finance than I do. I know more about drones than anybody. Nobody knows much more about technology, this type of technology, certainly, than I do. Nobody knows more about technology than me. Nobody in the history of this country has ever known so much about infrastructure as Donald Trump. I know the H-1B, the H-2B. Nobody knows it better than me. I know more about ISIS than
okay, you get the idea. This goes on for about 2.5 minutes, so we won't use the whole 2.5 minutes on this because it's a lot more the same. And the latest version of this, of course, includes COVID-19 and everything that the president knows about COVID-19. So interesting, right? Very clear, very decisive. And again, to his audience, it is what we call red meat, right? People love to hear this. And he's very, very concise about how he presents that information. Now, let's contrast with this interview, contrast the style, contrast the look, the dress, everything with Boris Johnson. This was late last year, so it was before COVID-19. Let's look at his style.
What do you do to relax? What do you do to switch off? I like to paint, or I make things. I like to... What do you make? I have a thing where I make models of... I make worlds in the world I run. We build beautiful... I make buses. You make models of buses? I make models of buses. So they're going to be in that history. So what I do... No, what I do make models of buses, what I make is... I get old... I don't know, wooden crates, yeah, right? And then I paint them, and they have two. Suppose it's a box that's been used to contain two wine bottles, right? Right. And it will have a dividing thing, yeah. And I turn it into a bus, and I put passengers. You really want to? You're making buses. You're making cardboard buses. Okay, that's what you do to enjoy yourself. I paint the passengers enjoying themselves. Okay, great. On a wonderful bus.
I get a kick out of that every time I see it. Maybe you've already seen it. It's made the rounds on social media. But I mean, really, now I know part of his shtick, right, is kind of looking disheveled and kind of being this guy that's not quite, polished and all that. But I mean, really, doing an interview, anytime he does an interview, he should at least look like a prime minister at some level, right? And here he is, the way he's sitting slouched on the chair, his tie is all askew. Obviously, his hair is always kind of in a state of turmoil. But beyond that, the words, the way that he describes his hobby, right? You would think that would be the most simple thing in the world for him to be able to get out in about 2 sentences. Takes him a long time, much longer than you would expect it to. Leaving the impression, at least in my mind, that probably isn't really his hobby at all. He just seems like he kind of made it up or something. I don't know. But anyway, it is important that we mix the verbal content and the, absolutely that non-verbal presentation. Now, one last thing. Clearly, the clips that we saw of Donald Trump and the thing that we saw of Bojo, 2 very different scenarios. One, obviously, Trump is at some sort of live event where he's talking to big bunches of people, and Bojo is a different type of event. So, it's not apples to apples, but just look at the style of presentation because both of them typically have that style even outside of these 2 examples. All right, your biggest communication challenge as an executive is that you know too much. Now, what do I mean by that? Because usually we think in terms of knowing a lot as being a good thing. Well, it is, of course, a great thing. And you need to know a lot for your company, your business, and hopefully you're an industry leader and a thought, a champion in the world of thought leadership. But here's the problem. When you know too much, you typically say too much. And this is a problem. I have seen this for 12 years, almost 13 years of working with highly performing, very successful executives. They almost always say too much in just about every situation. So I came up with this 80-20 rule, right? The 80-20 rule states very simply, about 80% of your knowledge, your total knowledge, is probably not interesting or important to most audiences, most topics that you're going to talk about. You need to find that sweet spot. What does that 20% look like? What is that nugget, that a given communication moment, interview, town hall meeting, whatever it is, what is that small bit of information that's needed, not the massive amount that is in your brain about your industry, about your business, your offerings. Now, having said that, and we'll talk in a minute about how to get to that point, there are, of course, certain times when you need to do a deep dive, right? You have certain clients and you're maybe trying to go through financials or whatever. Of course, you would need to do some sort of a deep dive. I'm talking here about, generally speaking, most of our communication opportunities are ones where we could vastly scale back the amount of information that we are giving to our audience. And what happens when you do that? People can listen more, they can remember more, you don't bore them, you don't confuse them with a lot of different messages. You stay on point and you are much more effective in the way that you communicate. So to do this, you got to think in terms of planning ahead. First and foremost, without stating the obvious, right? It's all about your audience, or at least it should be. Every audience deserves to have you lead with an outcome that matters to them, right? How will they benefit from what you are there to talk about? Right? Whether it's an internal staff meeting, your town hall meeting on upcoming holiday vacations, or whether it is talking with your clients or prospective clients or the board of directors, you need to think, always have this running through your mind. What is important to them? I will give you probably the simplest idea of the day today, and that is every audience cares about one thing, and that one thing is themselves. And I hope you're enjoying this presentation today, but I am under no illusions that you care about what is in this for you, right? And that's good. That's the way it should be. You're spending an hour or an hour and a half of your day watching me, watching this presentation, and you're doing it hoping to get some good information for yourself. Every audience you speak to feels exactly the same way. So as speakers, as communicators, as effective communicators, we need to honor that. A few things you can think about. Who is the audience, right? As you are doing your planning, as you are planning ahead, and this is not the day of, this is not 5 minutes before, this is in advance of that, whatever that communication is that you're going to give. Who's the audience? What are their needs, their interests? How much do they know about you? You know, do you need to establish your authority, or do they already know who you are? Their pain points, their sensitivities. And then, of course, what channel to use. We have so many ways that we can communicate with people today. And taking into effect what that is that channel is very important. Doing this presentation in person, as I have done for many years, or presentations like this one, this kind of coaching, is a very different animal than me giving it to you on Zoom, I assure you. And you all have had this experience now in the recent weeks of doing this too. It's really challenging. So for this presentation, for example, I put in a lot of polls, right? I have ways to try to hopefully engage you and make it interesting for you and get your feedback on key topics or key questions using the chat as well. So, you know, I have had to adjust my presentation, hopefully, to make it more relevant and interesting to you. That's what you need to think about doing as well, as you are talking to your stakeholders and your the people that you need to communicate with. So before your presentation, before talking whoever it is you need to talk with, your stakeholders, I think that you should put together a kind of game plan, right? First and foremost, what are the messages that you feel are important to get out, given that particular meeting or a particular interview or conference that you might be attending or speaking at. And then right after that, you figure out who the audience is and what they need to hear or want to hear out of that. Then you go back to your messages and you refine them, or your talking points. Maybe we put it broadly that way. And then practice giving those messages, giving those talking points. Now, if you think to the last conference you were at, last industry conference, it would have been probably in maybe January or maybe late last year. If you were one of the people who was keynoting or in a let's say a panel discussion, you would have had to make several choices about what information you would give to that audience at that time. And let's say that there were 400 people in the room. You might have thought, well, you know what, I'm going to give some broad messages so that everybody in the room gets something out of it, okay? About the company, about what you do, and that might be okay. But the targeted, the high-performing communication professional thinks in terms of what are the important messages for the day for our company? We've got a new offering, or we're opening a new office somewhere, or we're hiring, we need new workers, whatever that message might be. And then you target it to that appropriate part of the audience that's in that room. Now, that might only be 100 people out of 400 that's in that room. But isn't it better to be relevant, 100% relevant to 100 people in that room than mildly, blandly relevant to maybe more than that? My perspective as a lifelong communicator is that's where you should be. You should be the person that is going to be memorable to the most important group that is sitting in front of you. I'm just looking to see, we've got a few comments on Boris and the bus, and thanks for putting those in there. 350 million a week, yeah, we know about that claim on the side of the buses before Brexit. Okay. No particular questions, but if you do have some questions along the way, please go ahead and put those in there. And Donna, you can just flag those to me if you wouldn't mind as they come out. All right, so again, this is your strategic game plan, right, for your communication. Now, of course, it can get much more in-depth than this, depending on how much time you have to put into it. But this is something that you need to think about if the speech or if the talk or if the meeting is big enough. This is something that's days before, not hours before. And really go through this. Now, hopefully, those of you who are, at your companies, maybe you have a comms team, a marketing team. If you're not one of those already, part of that team, and they should be able to help you flesh out some of these topics and some of the messages that you can give. Storytelling. Now, I understand from Nick that you had a storytelling session on one of these live events a number of weeks ago, or perhaps it was last week. So I won't spend a lot of time on storytelling, but I'd like to give you what I feel is the importance of storytelling from my perspective. And that is a perspective of a journalist. I've been a news editor, a reporter, all of that, right? And as a journalist, I look at what my audience will care about in a given story. And then I gather the facts and the information, and I try to present those that information, those stories, in a way that will be of interest to the readers, the viewers, the listeners, etc. Right? Kind of makes sense. This is what I'm suggesting for you, that you think about how you can be a storyteller as well for your company, for your product, your service, your brand, whatever it is. So if you are going to present your information to a given audience at a given time, think about these things. Think about these qualities of a good story that people universally like. And it doesn't necessarily mean a story that you're writing, but one that you're presenting to people, right? So timely, right? People want information that's useful today or useful in some way to them. Surprising. People are surprised by certain things. That is very captivating to them. Useful. News you can use. Stuff in your daily life. Oh, I didn't know that. That's very useful to me. I can use that information. issues of importance. That varies, of course, depending on who the person is and what the topic is. Enticing, heartwarming, saving the whales, the environment's now cleaner because we're not flying as much and using as many cars, etc. Things that are fun. If that's part of your remit in your company to give people joy in some way, and engaging videos, engaging pictures. Of course, we all know that we are very much in a visual environment today. And so if you're thinking about telling your story, how can you touch on one or more of these specific qualities as you are giving that story, presenting that story to your stakeholders, to your audience, right? So again, storytelling is a big topic, and I know you guys have covered it in a previous session, but I just, from my perspective as a former journalist, these are the things that we look at and editors look at as well. So for example, if you're pitching your stories to media organizations, you might want to pitch, hey, what's really surprising about this that your audience, your readers or viewers will find is X, or you know, what's timely about this is it's happening tomorrow, or whatever. You get the idea. Recently, we've seen this being done to great impact. Estee Lauder, as you know, the makeup company, they have donated in recent weeks to global COVID-19 causes. And they have donated tens and tens of millions of dollars, probably pushing over $50 million, probably north of 50 million, to global medical organizations, national medical organizations in the US, in places like New York and elsewhere, donating products, donating to a fund for employees who are impacted by COVID-19. They have done so much. It's amazing. And many companies have, and hopefully maybe your company has done so as well. And they've done the right thing for all the right reasons. And recently their CEO, Fabrizio Freda, was on CNBC, was able to talk about that. Coincidentally, they've also seen a spike in their sales and you know, feel good follow-on, feel good knock-on effect. So they were able to talk about a business story, but as well as a cool giving a story that is useful to people as well. A quick other case study that happened here a number of years ago. As you may know, in Singapore at Seletar Air Base, Rolls-Royce aircraft is based, and they make the turbo fan blades, the turbo core fan blades for the A380. It's called the Trent 1000 engine, right? It's the biggest engine that Rolls-Royce aircraft makes. And they make all of these things right here in little old Singapore. So as you can imagine, very high value and also very high tolerances and things like that in this manufacturing process. Well, a number of years ago, if you were in town, you may recall that Prince Will and Princess Kate came to Singapore, and of course, part of their duties are doing a dog and pony show for the British brands. And so they went up to Seletar and they came up with this photo op. As you can see, they got Kate to kind of go in front of what would normally be something that nobody would ever take a picture of. But what is on the other side of this screen is several hundred journalists, print, photo, and TV journalists behind a line, all shooting this because, of course, the royals were of great interest. This was their first trip together overseas as a young married couple. And so it was a mob of people everywhere they went. And so what would normally be a really, really lame thing, a turbo core fan blade assembly for most of us, unless you're in the aviation industry, of course, instantly became amazing news. Well, along with this, it wasn't just enough to have Kate do this, but they thought about how can we make this extra special? So somebody thought back to World War II. And those of you who are Americans or who know your history, this was a propaganda campaign in the US about the women who stayed home to work in the wartime factories. And Rosie the Riveter was her name. And she became this beloved icon of women at home getting the job done in the wartime factories of World War II America. So somebody thought, well, you know what? That was a pretty good campaign. People really liked that. What if we got Kate to do it? And so they got Kate do the pose, the Rosie the Riveter pose. Not exactly, but close enough. You get the idea. And this photo went ballistic in terms of its becoming viral. It was in hundreds and hundreds of publications across the world. In fact, it was the first time that Rolls-Royce aircraft had been in Hello magazine in the UK. Those of you who are familiar with the Chat magazine, it was massive around the world. And the company got some $12 million of PR value out of it. If they would have had for every time it was placed in every publication and every TV show, would have cost them $12 million. Why do I mention this story? Not all of you are going to have access to a Royal. Not all of you are in the aircraft business, but there might be some way that you can take the story you have to tell and make it just a little bit more interesting if you think about it in a different way. That's the point of this story, and that's how it worked very well for Rolls-Royce. Okay, let's go to a breakout room for just about 5 minutes. And what I'd like you to do in a breakout room, there'll be teams of 5 of you. We don't have a lot of time, but I'd like you to do the breakout room and just very quickly think of one story that you could tell about your company or tell better about your company. Now, you don't have to give how you're going to tell it or what you're going to say, but just to go ahead and give with the colleagues in that room, just a brief thing, just to get you thinking about a story that you might tell differently. Okay, go. So it shouldn't be throwing off any issues today. I wouldn't wear a thin stripe though, however. Richard Branson slammed for using a tie. Yeah, well, look, we all know that there are changing dynamics in terms of what's appropriate for business these days. Certainly, people are doing much more just shirts, open collar shirts. And in a Zoom world, in the Skype world in which we live, Microsoft world, people are not wearing jackets anymore, generally speaking, unless it's a very high level meeting that you might be doing online. So, do it makes you, what makes sense for your work situation. And let's see, yep, a ream of A4 paper works, or a couple reams of A4 paper, absolutely. Champagne box, yes. Take care of the champagne first, put that in the fridge, all that sort of stuff. Virtual backgrounds. Good question on the virtual background, very popular. I'm using one today. And they're not a must-have, but they certainly do come in handy occasionally. You can put slides on like I've got. And by the way, I'd love to have you connect with me either on LinkedIn or send me an email if you'd like. Happy to answer any questions if we don't get to those questions today. All right, Nick, let's see, dress professionally, do what you do. If your company wears, yes, if your company normally wears hoodies and t-shirts, that's fine, absolutely. For sure. But depending on who your audience is that you're speaking to, if it's a board of directors or a high level interview with financial media, you may want to tone that down a little bit. You may want to take on a slightly different dress just to make sure that it feels appropriate to the communication that you're going to be giving. All right.
Glenn, we're going to take this chance to thank you very much, obviously, for being with us, and we can stay online for a few more questions and answers. And I'm sure one of the questions will be if we can get some presentation after, and I obviously understand that Glenn cannot share his PowerPoint deck with us, but we do have the recording, which we can share the link with you. That's okay with you, Glenn? Is that correct?
Absolutely. And like I say, if you have individual questions, please reach out to me. I'm always happy to hook up with people on LinkedIn or like I say, through email. So yeah, absolutely. You can, if you have a QR code reader, you can show it on this one that's on the screen right now. That'll take you directly to my LinkedIn page. And you can just hit me a connection request and I'll reply tonight or tomorrow. So that's good.
Okay. Thank you, Glenn. And if someone have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask the questions, but we can hereby close the formal session. So thank you very much for joining and have a great evening, and stay online if you have some questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nick, and to EGN for letting me come on this today. It was a pleasure to talk with all of you. Thanks for your nice comments in the chat as well.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I think I wanted to elaborate a question from Stein. in regard to, you know, we always say like, how to stop that bad habit. I do have that habit sometime as well. So how to, you know, always conscious about that.
First thing, if you understand that you do have a habit where you say one of those words, that's good, right? That's, you know, understanding that you have the problem is the first step. Secondly, you may want to get a friend, maybe it's a spouse or maybe it's a coworker, confidentially take them on the side and say, look, I want to change something about the way I speak. I want to get rid of this word. Could you do me a favor? Every time I say this word in a polite way, you know, raise your hand or some sort of signal between you two so that you will understand that you've just done it. Go back, pause, and then restart your sentence. Now, it wouldn't work obviously in a lot of staff meetings and things like that, but on a personal basis, it would definitely work. And aside from having a coach do it for you, you can have a kind of pair off with a buddy that does it. Most of the people that I work with, I have them do this exercise, which is if I ask them a question or if somebody else asks them a question, pause before you answer and count to 3. And then give the answer. Because usually that 3 seconds is when we're going, so if you can get yourself to pause instead of saying the or the the verbal pause, then that is one way that you can do it. You might need a friend though to help you understand when you're doing it and when you're not, because for many of us it's so instinctive, right? We just do it automatically.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I paused for 3 seconds before I said thank you.
And it worked.
All right, anyone else wanted to ask a question? You can just unmute yourself. Anyone?
Hi, Glenn, it's David.
Yes, David, please.
Let me start the video. I have a nice shot, okay? Glenn, a quick question. I see, when I see different companies, I see different cultures, and especially in tech companies, I see people being very loose with what they wear, and they even go to very important meetings with a quite lax outfit. So my question is, isn't that at the moment changing the perception of what you wear? And even in board meetings, you see Mark Zuckerberg always going with a hoodie, or you know, the Google inventors, founders. What is your perception on that? Do you think it's a fundamental change, or do you think it's just they can just do it because they can do it?
I think perception of this is changing. If you have a startup and you've just started, I don't know if any of you know Found 8. It used to be called the Impact Hub here. It's an accelerator space, and I'm the communications mentor there. And you know, many of the startups there, everybody is in t-shirts and jeans and, you know, whatever, as you would expect. But here's the difference. You know, when you first start at that level, that's okay. But as you are in, you know, are you elevating into a level where you're looking for financing funds, talking to VCs, talking to potential partners? My personal belief is that you have to moderate. You have to, you know, everyone has to raise their game a little bit, right? You have to be a little bit smarter in the way that you look, because you do need to kind of fit in with the audience that you're going to be talking to. Now, if you're in that position and you're wearing a hoodie and you're going to talk to kids at a high school, cool, right? That's probably okay. But if you're talking to a VC about Series A funding, you might want to maybe not necessarily put on a suit and tie, but certainly dress a little bit more appropriately. I think people just need to think about the audience. What would the audience kind of norm or expectation be?
Okay. Thanks, Glenn.
You bet, David.
Thank you. Anyone else? Preeti, maybe you will have any questions? Okay, thank you. Martin, Mette?
I always have
Emma?
questions, but I
Martin,
don't want to block
Dutchman.
anybody else. Fellow Dutchman, right?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I was Dutch 350 years ago. So
okay.
I'm actually from Chicago.
but you still speak with your grandma every night, right?
My ancestors were all from Zutphen in Holland. Yes.
All right,
Maybe A quick question from me. I really liked your presentation a lot, and I agree about the confidence, the credibility, the clarity. I also believe that great communicators are also people who are able to go into the emotional space and really speak from the heart. And sometimes that's showing, you know, I mean, sometimes emotions can disrupt the confidence or the credibility. So what's your view on kind of finding the right mix? Because it's easy for a confident speaker or communicator to sound a bit cocky or arrogant. So what's your view on that?
It's a good question. We saw several weeks ago when Prime Minister Lee gave one of his speeches, we were just about to tighten down on the circuit breaker. And he spent a fair amount of time talking about the emotional and physical impact on people. And he was very, I thought he was very interesting the way that he said, look, this is going to be a really tough time for a lot of people. A lot of us are going to find it very difficult to stay at home. A lot of us are going to find it difficult not to go out and get our favorite food or to go visit our extended family members. It's going to be really hard, et cetera, right? So he really, I think, opened up on an emotional level. He wasn't crying or anything, but he really opened up that emotional door about what we needed to do in the circuit breaker here in Singapore, in addition to the A, B's, and C's of you can do this and you can't do that. I thought it was extremely effective, the way he did that. We've seen Justin Trudeau do that as well in recent weeks on some of the things that he has done. I think you contrast that with President Trump, who doesn't seem to have much, in my opinion, empathy, or at least express it publicly at all. And I think that's a big mistake in a time like this, when so many people are really, really, you know, emotionally and physically hurting. So I think there is a door there that can be opened. I think it must be very situational, though. You as an executive in your company, as you are trying to work forward, and everyone now, we're all in the space where we need to get on with kind of getting back to business and selling and doing the things we do in our business life, but we have to also be mindful, obviously, about the broader world and what's happening with people who are sick and more people getting sick every day.
Yeah, thank you. That's useful.
Sure. Thanks, Emma.
Corina, you want to add something, please?
Hi, Glenn. I thought that was a very nice presentation. Good refresher while we're stuck at home. So I work with quite conservative bosses, and you know, unlike the people whose English are first language, a lot of them could be Chinese, could be Japanese, whatever. And it's very difficult for them to express emotion and be empathetic. And, you know, it's good enough they deliver the speech from the paper and they memorize maybe like 1/3 of it. Do you have any tips?
It's a good question, Emma. And the challenge is everyone has their own communication style. And look, I'm you know, American from the Midwest. My style is very different than a 60-year-old Singaporean Chinese boss who's the second generation or first generation of a family-owned company. We are never going to be the same kind of communicator, and that's okay, right? Everybody has a different style. Everybody has a different approach. I think my point is, if once you talk to the person that's doing the communicating and really try to help them understand the audience that they're going to speak to and what the needs of that audience are, I think that can open up the conversation for them on how they need to present information. You know, we have seen over the years, I've been in Singapore for 15 years, you know, speeches by government, you know, ministers and different people. And to be honest with you, I don't know if you feel this way, but I certainly do, because I look at all the speeches, I listen to them, and pretty much every speech is almost the same. You just change some of the names and the dates and the places and the particular project that's being worked on, right? Other than that, the speeches are basically the same. They always start the same way. They always have the same kind of pace and rhythm. They thank the same kind of people, and then they end the same way. There's obviously a formula somewhere that people are very much holding on to. And it's only been sort of this newer generation of politicians in Singapore that we've seen that loosen up a bit and become a little bit more dynamic, which I think is the way it should be, the way people really communicate, right? But for many years, it was very stiff. So to answer your question, I hope, Karina, is if you can work with that person or those people in your organization and focus on the audience, don't focus merely on what they need to, or want to say, but focus on who's going to be listening and ask the question, okay, so what does that person or that group of people need to hear or want to hear? Take the focus away from them and put it on to somebody else. Maybe they will be able to start changing or modifying their communication style a little bit. It's not an easy process.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Matthias? Tarun? Any questions? Mile? Or Hokchin?
No question,
Tarun,
just
please.
no question, just a comment. Thanks, Glenn, for the presentation. It was very enlightening. One of the recent studies I read was about if how people perceive others who are dressed as rich. If your clothes give the perception that you're rich, then within 30 seconds you are assumed to be well-to-do, well-educated, and you're perceived as intelligent, irrespective of the background. So they adjusted the study to test for different backgrounds, education levels, and it always came out the same. It's always based on how well you're dressed.
Yeah, sorry, so did you have a question or is that just an observation?
Just an observation, yeah.
Yeah, Tarun, I totally agree with you. And, you know, I know, I have a number of friends who went to like Ivy League schools in the US, Harvard and Stanford and different places like that. And they have done absolutely zero with their lives and their careers, right? They have not been very successful at all. And I know people that have gone to local community colleges who have risen to be amazing CEOs and entrepreneurs and people like that. So I get your point, right? It's not always the person that you would think should be successful or is successful that is. And I think this is to me, this is why someone being a really good communicator really makes a difference, right? Because even if you don't have a pedigree of going to the right school or having money behind you or whatever, if you know how to communicate properly to the audience you're speaking to, a lot of that stuff goes away because people instantly recognize talent if talent can present its ideas and its thoughts in an appropriate way to an appropriate audience. So I think more than ever, I think that's really important because we're seeing so many executives and entrepreneurs from so many walks of life from so many different countries now really doing amazing things. And unfortunately, many of them get overlooked because they just don't know how to express themselves. And I feel personally, I feel like that's a really unfortunate situation which I hope will change.
Thanks.
All right. Anyone else? Otherwise, thank you so much. Oh, yes, Matthias, please.
Matthias raised his hand.
Yeah, I used the raise hands in the participants, but the chat box is not open. One can't see it. Thanks, Donna and Glenn. Glenn, thanks for the presentation. I really find it very interesting how we, in the meantime, look at the importance of these virtual meetings and the little things that we have or that we should consider when we have these meetings. What I believe is strongly talking about the quality of the microphone, about clothing, about how we present ourselves. It is very close to personal branding. And at the end of the day, it is of course up to everyone how they want to be perceived by someone that sees them in a boardroom or someone that sees them in the virtual meeting. And if I go to the board of directors meeting, I will put a tie on. If I go to the office here in Singapore for my staff, I will not put a tie on. And I believe it is very similar to what we should do on these virtual meetings. Of course, knowing that everyone is working from home and it might be a little more casual, but still, perhaps it is also a little bit of respect towards the others. I'm not sure. But to me, definitely it is.
So Matthias, are you German or Austrian or?
Yeah, sorry, I'm German. Yeah, that
Okay.
accent gives it away.
No, that's okay. And the reason I ask you that is it's neither here nor there, but growing up in the US, we had a saying that, and I don't know if you had the same in Germany, that's why I'm asking. And the saying was, dress for the job that you want, not the job you have, right? Same, I think, with Zoom and with online meetings. Present yourself for the position that you want to be thought of in, and not maybe particularly necessarily the position you have, right? So if you are always looking sharp, maybe with your dress or with your online appearance, your online persona, as you mentioned, I think that's the right way to look at it, because a lot of people get on and they frankly are not very impressive, and I think there is a respect level there as well, as you rightly mentioned. So I'm always a big fan of dress for the job you want, not the one you have, and I think that filters down to your look on online as well.
Perhaps I'm a little too German, but I told my colleagues, we have a lot of virtual meetings with customers, right? I'm a big fan of creating experiences with the customers, as they usually stick longer than any content you would bring to them. And for a lot of the customers and the CEOs that we talk to, is the first time that they have virtual meetings with their suppliers. And my team knows that I would not want to see the guys without a shirt, any kind of shirt, but without the proper shirt in these customer virtual meetings. At least put a shirt on, not a t-shirt. Doesn't matter what the customer wear, but make sure that we're representing ourselves in the way that we want to be, a quality supplier.
Absolutely. Your customers have choices, right? They can go with you, or they can go with company B, C, or D. And if you guys all show up in t-shirts and not looking very good, not looking very businesslike, well, it makes it that much easier for them to look at the next company, right? So absolutely, I agree with you. And it's not a matter of being German. I think it's just a matter of being smart when it comes to business. And I would even say that a tech startup, a tech startup would do well to at least look presentable in the sort of broader definition of that, right? You can wear a hoodie, but make sure it's a really nice looking hoodie, or you can wear a sweatshirt, but there are obviously various levels of how people dress. I think it can be done a lot of different ways, but it needs to be appropriate to the situation, appropriate to the audience, and that I think is the most important thing.
And without taking too much of your time, just one question, Glenn.
Sure.
What do you think, how will communication and, let's say, the teaching of communicating change after COVID and after everyone has gotten used to video meetings and online meetings?
The world will never be the same, right? And we've all seen that. Now, people that have never done anything like a Zoom or Skype or whatever before have now already been doing them multiple times a week. And I'm sure some places are still probably doing voice calls as well, but let's face it, most everybody that I know in business has had some level of exposure on video now. And now that executives are seeing the value and the ability to still conduct business at a fairly high level using these different types of communication tools, why would people ever go back? My prediction is many companies will reduce their physical space by maybe 20 or 25% in the future, maybe at their next contract renegotiation for their office space, because they realize at any given time, they're now able to have 20 or 25% of their staff working remotely. Why not, right? And why pay for all the brick and mortar space when you don't need to? Additionally, I see that this tension between co-working spaces and traditional office space, Class A office space, is really going to explode, right? Because people don't need either of them anymore on a full-time basis like they used to. Of course, a lot of people will go back to offices, but even the traditional office structure is going to change because people don't want to sit in an open plan anymore where people are breathing on them right next to them or right across from them. There's going to have to be a lot of structural changes as well in the traditional office space if people go back at all to those spaces.
All right, thank you, Glenn. Anyone else? Last question? Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Glenn. So happy
thanks,
to.
Thanks for staying on, and please reach out to me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Let's give Glenn a round of applause.
Yep.
Oh, thanks, Emma.
Glenn, well done.
Thanks, Tarun.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Take
See you
care.
again at the next
safe.
meeting.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Glenn, I've seen you at SMU. I used to work for SMU, so I'm familiar with your content and